Good evening. It is 6:30, so we'll make a start. Welcome to a meeting of the Scrutiny Committee of Melton Borough Council. Members are reminded that we will be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak, and to use their microphones when speaking for the benefit of all present. The microphone is live when the red light displays. Please switch mobile phones to silent. Should you need to leave the room during the meeting, unless it is an emergency evacuation when emergency exit should be used, please use the marked exit and entrance. I'll just provide a reminder of that evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the chamber. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist anyone who requires any assistance. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record, or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. I am Robert Child. I'm the chairman of the Scrutiny Committee, and I confirm that the following members are present and are participating in this meeting. Councillors Steve Carter, Prue Chandler, Jeannie Douglas, Chris Evans, Elaine Holmes, Pam Posner, Tim Webster, and Jacob Wilkinson. We also welcome the leader of the council, Councillor Joe Orson, and members of the cabinet. In addition to this, we have the following officers in attendance: the Chief Executive, Ed de Coverley, the Director for Housing and Communities, the Deputy Chief Executive, Michelle Howard, the Director for Corporate Services, Dawn Garton, Monitoring Officer, Kieran Stockley, Senior Democratic Services and Scrutiny Officer, Adam Green. In addition to this, we have the following external participants in attendance. Joining via remote link, Mark Bandelli and Andrew Laird from Mutual Ventures, Nathan Elvery, who is acting as the strategic advisor to both councils. Item 1 of the agenda, apologies for absence.
Chairman, can I just say something before we start, please? Yeah, I'd just like to bring this up quick before we start. I'm a bit disappointed with the papers, how I got the papers so late. You know what I mean? I had a meeting last night, licensing, that come through Thursday morning with this, Thursday morning, scrutiny. This come through on Friday morning. I go to work, work full time, right? It doesn't give you enough time to go through it, Chair. You know what I mean? It's given me 3 days to go through all this, and it's not good enough.
Yeah, well, we're all in the same boat, Councillor Carter. Unfortunately, it's messed a lot of people's weekends up, but it's your point has been noted. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment?
Certainly.
Can I just say, this is the worst set of papers since I've become a councillor that I've had to read. If you got motion sickness, you'd have been sick. You would. Because you got yourself lost because you didn't know which way you were turning them.
Yeah, you had to keep.
I think the number of papers that we've got to read on such an important subject as this should have been better laid out.
Yeah, I understand from Councillor Atherton, she got dizzy at times having to go like that, you know, and it's. I've mentioned it, and it will be noted.
I tell you, at one stage, I chucked him across the room because I was just fed up. I was, honestly.
And they were still in the same order.
Well, unfortunately, yes.
Thank you. Item 1, apologies for absence, is Councillor Siggy Atherton. Item 2, minutes. Can I have a proposer and seconder to confirm the minutes of the meeting we held on the 18th of October 22? Jacob and Councillor Posner. Thank you. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda for this meeting. I understand there is an officer declaration to be made. Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you'll appreciate, Michelle Howard and I have worked with the leaders and colleagues from across both councils to support the development of the strategic partnership business case. Given that some elements of the proposition affect our employment, I would like to declare an interest on behalf of us both in relation to item 6. If members have any questions on that aspect, then Nathan Elvery, who's acting as our strategic advisor, is available to answer them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any councillors who wish to make a declaration other than the officers one? Sorry. Okay, sorry, Councillor Holmes.
Do I take it then that the deputy chief exec and the chief exec will be going out of the room?
They could.
I mean, we need to talk about this, don't we?
Yeah, yes.
And it makes all the difference, I think. Thank you.
Can I just ask the monitoring officer? Thank you.
I think it's important for members to know that this is will be talking about the proposition, which is about a shared officer structure. So if members feel that at that point they would prefer the chief exec and the deputy chief exec, who may well be implicated in this, to leave to aid debate, then that's absolutely fine. I'm sure that that's amenable. We've got Nathan Elvery as a strategic advisor to the partnership, who will be able to answer any questions for members in that respect.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Holmes?
Well, it just seems as though it would be a lot better for, we are the members, and I would have thought that it would be more helpful for everybody, because, you know, we are elected members, and it isn't really very fair for the chief exec and the deputy chief exec. This is my feelings. I don't know about anybody else's.
I don't see why we can't ask them to leave the room at sensitive times, if you don't mind that.
What I would say, Chair, is I'm happy for them to have in the room. They can go and sit in the waiting area and watch it on YouTube. What would the difference be? The meeting would still be shown in public.
Yeah.
So I think it's for a matter of.
Yeah, we'll wait till we get there then, Councillor Holmes, and then make a decision. Thank you. Item 4, review of the forward plan. To consider the attached forward plan and identify any relevant items for inclusion in the scrutiny work programme, or to request further information. I invite any comments to on the forward plan to move this one on. Is there anybody got a further comment? No. Okay, item 5, review of the scrutiny work programme. Members are to review and comment upon the attached scrutiny work programme. I have received a request to include an item on the work programme being held in January. This will be a workshop. The 5th of January has been identified as a possible date. With more details, I'll invite the Director for Housing and Communities, Michelle Howard.
Thank you, Chair. So as discussed, I'd be really grateful as a committee if you could consider a request for a workshop session as suggested for the 5th of January. And this is to enable scrutiny input into the development of a leisure procurement strategy for Melton Borough Council. This is a really important piece of work for us because that discussion would help shape the leisure contract procurement process ahead of us finalising a procurement specification to then seek bidders for the operation of our leisure centres from the 1st of April 2024. Just to be really clear, this is separate to the leisure vision piece that is already on your work programme. Just to confirm, the council's current leisure contract, which is the operation of Waterfield Leisure Centre and Melton Sports Village, comes to an end at the end of March 2024, and it can't be extended again due to procurement rules. The leisure procurement strategy is a really key piece of work because it will enable us then to make an informed, take an informed approach to commissioning a provider for those services from the 1st of April. Chair, I know when we've spoken, I've explained to you that we've procured some external expertise to support us in developing that document and then to guide us through what is a really complex procurement process. This expertise is considered even more important to help us to do a robust and effective job, given the age and condition of our existing facilities and also the financial pressures on the leisure industry. That sector expertise, knowledge and ability to help us to understand what good looks like is considered really important for that particular piece of work. And we're being supported by a company called SLC, who have also supported Harbour District Council with their high quality leisure procurement plan. They're already supporting us to review information, to carry out some market testing and to support us in that piece of work. And they would also develop a shadow bid that would help us to understand what we could expect from the market, whilst also guiding us through procurement, evaluation and contract award. As we did with our HRA business plan and asset management plan, we're really keen to take the views of scrutiny members on board as part of that, which is why the request is for us to have a workshop session to go through some of the key points through a facilitated discussion, to help us to then shape a document for consideration by Cabinet the following month. So that's the request, Chair, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wish to comment? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michelle. That's quite comprehensive. I know we're using more external expertise and you've procured that already. What is the cost to date and the cost for the overall element of that project before it even comes to scrutiny?
Okay, so the cost of the external expertise is around £30,000, and we've been through a market testing process to arrive at the decision to procure that particular expertise. And I'm more than happy to share with the committee the reasons that we've taken the decision to bring some external support in, given the complexity of that particular procurement and the context that I've explained.
Where's the money being funded from? No.
Yeah, I think we're going to be having a decision notice. We're going to have to draw from reserves to fund that amount because it's additional, and because of the pressures on the budget, we've got no savings elsewhere to cover that cost, so reserves.
What is the for this financial year? What is the total cost for consultants from the council? Because we've been using consultants left, right, and centre for every project. Certainly in the last 12 months, everything that's come to scrutiny has involved consultants to some degree.
When this was submitted to scrutiny somewhat 2 or 3 months ago, it was about $500,000 for agency workers and $500,000 on consultants. So you can probably rule of thumb, it'll be probably in the same sort of ballpark. Councillor Chandler.
Is it prudent for us to be discussing things that are going to affect the next council? It'll be an entirely different council if the what you read in the paper is true. I mean, I've had the news on tonight coming in and there's more doom and gloom. I mean, I just think it's ridiculous to keep making all these decisions for another council.
But we've got to keep the local government wheel turning, otherwise it'll come to a stop and then start again with the new council. So I think the continuity, it will take probably 3 or 4 months to get the everything on board. So,
but you do take my point.
I take your point. Yeah. Councillor Posnett.
Can I just ask, are we using the same consultant we used last time?
We're not. I did clarify that.
Thank you. Thank the Lord for that.
Thank you.
There is a bit of common sense there.
Yeah. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, you're talking about leisure, and I just wanted to make it a point. I don't know whether you're talking about what you might do with the old swimming bath, but do remember that we don't own it all, because town and state owns some of it. And so we can't be just selling something that we don't.
No, look, we're looking at a new tender for the from the 1st of April 2024. So that we'll slot a date in. I'll just check my diary on the 5th of January. Okay. Right. So that's added on. So item 6, the strategic partnership business case, the 188 pages. Given the length of the business case, I have agreed that a presentation can be provided to summarise the details and understand that the leader will be supported by the chief exec and colleagues from Mutual Ventures in doing this. I would like to invite Councillor Orson to introduce the partnership report and business case. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. First of all, an apology. I don't like to start with an apology, but as some of you are aware, I've been struggling with my eyesight of recent weeks, and I keep seeing double, and I'm really struggling at the moment. So if I put my hand like this, hopefully you'll understand it does help me to get some vision going. I have to say I've been totally sober for 5 weeks now, so it's nothing to do with any celebration of my favourite football team turning the corner. But thank you for the opportunity to open this debate of scrutiny. I'm well aware scrutiny is here tonight. You know, basically, it's not a decision process. Quite rightly, it's to raise queries and then to give opportunities for everyone to get answers to those queries before a vote, which will take place, going from memory, 4 weeks tonight, December the 20th, which is a bit scary because that's only 5 days off Christmas, isn't it? But that's where we are. I'd like to formally, although you've welcomed Mark from Mutual Ventures and also Nathan as well. They've been very useful over the past few weeks. They've really done a tremendous amount of work, Bob, and I can't tell you we're very grateful for that. First of all, this process started purely out of discussions between myself and the leader of Harborough District Council, Phil King. I've known Phil, like Pam, for a number of years now. And but basically when he became leader, I can't quite remember when he became leader, I started to get to know him a lot better. And we used to have many a discussion. And in some ways, this has all come about basically because of, if you remember, the County Council raised the prospect of one council covering the whole of Leicestershire. And if you remember, there was further discussions that went on all around that. And a lot of people said we should have 2 unitary councils, i.e. a north and a south split. Phil and I talked about that a lot, and we decided, when I say we, that's Phil and myself, that an east-west split would suit Melton and Harborough better, bringing in Charnwood. But as we know, the unitary argument is dead in the water at this moment in time. So Phil and I started talking, and we naturally moved on to what we call here a strategic alliance. So I have to emphasize this has been totally led by members, and I hope you'll appreciate that. This is not an officer wish whatsoever. It was raised by Phil and I, and I took it to my cabinet and also my group as well some months ago, if you remember, Bob, because you were there. Our cabinets, that's Harborough and ourselves, have both made a commitment to explore further and requested a business case be brought back for consideration at council in December with engagement at scrutiny and audit prior to it coming forward. And of course, that's why we're here tonight, Bob. We're following everything that we can possibly to give everyone the opportunity to have their say. Timescales, I accept have been tight, but I would certainly like to thank officers and Mark for producing an extremely, what I consider, comprehensive assessment. And we now have over a month to consider it before the council meeting in December. Now, when we talk about the partnerships, we are talking about exploring opportunities. We're talking about working with a partner to address common problems. And of course, we have many, many common issues. As in the report you've seen already, where we work with Harborough already. What I do like about the Strategic Alliance, it gives us a massive opportunity to have a louder voice, because it's clearly said in that report, we are the 4th smallest council. Put ourselves together with Harborough, all of a sudden, I think, going from memory, 147th, I looked at Chief Exec, I got 147 on my mind some way. That gives us a louder shout. We're a huge rural area, many common aspects between ourselves and Harborough. And to be fair, I think we all share that aim. We all want to shout louder and be heard as well. And that's what this is all about. So also I have to emphasize, there has been some confusion. We are talking here a strategic alliance, not a merger. And I can't say that strong enough. As you've seen, built into the various clauses in the booklet, there are opportunities to walk away from the strategic alliance if, for whatever one side decides it's not working. I had an opportunity to speak to one of the colleagues, I won't say who it is around this table last night, sorry, and they concurred with that and they thought that was good music. As a district, sometimes we have to get our voice heard, and that's what I've been talking to make that impact. And also coming into that, we've got small teams, as we already know. In some cases, we only have one officer to do something or the other. If that officer falls sick, that can mean, shall we say, if they got double vision like I've got, that could mean 5 weeks up to now, 6 weeks up to now, and they're off. If we're in with another authority, we've got the opportunity to double up. That's the disadvantage of being a small council, of course. But by having that alliance, we should be able to capitalise on that. And we do get knocked off course, as you well know, being that. The financial pressures, the partnership has the potential to deliver savings which provide some protection. It's on page, Councillor de Burgh reminded me earlier on, pages around 30, 31, somewhere there. And as you know, we are heading for a large deficit. This will deliver savings. This is all from memory. I'm sure someone will catch me out if I get it wrong. This could and should deliver savings of around 230,000 over 3 years. And that will roughly be just short of a third of that whole. So that cannot just be brushed away. And I have to say that if we don't take those savings, we have to find that money from somewhere. So what are we going to look at? Are we going to look at no Christmas lights next year? Are we going to look at getting rid of BMI learning? These are sort of decisions that would have to be taken. You already mentioned the leisure project. Interestingly enough, the leisure contract, who we share with Harbour, the same contractors, that expires. Again, I look towards the chief executive, at least for a nod of approval sometime in 2024. Yep, same time. So this would also give us a massive opportunity to join forces with another council to explore the possibilities. So if we want to keep improving and protect our services as much as we can, then doing nothing is not an option. That's how I see it. I can confirm the cabinet all see it like that. It is simply not an option just to do nothing. The business case sets out a very simple proposition to work more closely with a partner we already work well with, and for something that we will benefit and both our communities and our organisations. You have to remember, this isn't really about Melton Borough Council. It's not really about Harbour District Council. It's delivering services to the people out there. And if we have to start making cuts because we haven't found the finance, it is them who will suffer, and they will blame the councils quite correctly. The proposed legal framework protects both councils and ensures our sovereignty is protected. And if it doesn't deliver what we want, then we can revert back to the current arrangements. In other words, we can walk away. Ultimately, the business case makes a strong argument for the partnership. But I, and like my colleagues on the cabinet, are keen to listen to the views of Scrutiny tonight. So these can be taken on board as my cabinet considers the details at our meeting in December, which I believe is on the 6th. And on that note, I'd like to hand over to Ed de Coverley, Chief Executive, to introduce the report and presentation. And again, thank you for allowing me a few minutes, Councillor Child.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you. With your permission, Councillor Child, if I could just set out the context of the business case that you'll be hearing this evening. And in a moment, I'll be handing over to Mark Bandali from Mutual Ventures, who will set out the detail of the analysis and the 5 cases they've undertaken. And then I'll offer a couple of concluding remarks, particularly in relation to staff engagement we've done in relation to the process so far. So just to remind really, and obviously the leader's already reflected on what brought us to this point. Obviously, we were commissioned by Cabinet to develop a business case, which is what we brought forward to you with support from Mutual Ventures and Nathan Elvery as our strategic advisor to give us the expertise and capacity and independence to consider this proposition. And the business case focuses both on why we might consider this as well as how, and as the leader just mentioned, it potentially creates a framework for collaboration going forward. I'm not going to go into the slide in any details, just a reminder really of the timeline that we've been working to, the initial approach from Harborough in September and the various stages we've gone through since that time. Obviously, the business case was published on the 18th of November, and we're now working through the various committee processes as set out. In terms of the business case itself, again, you would have seen these slides before. There are three key elements to it: the design principles, so the characteristics of any partnership that we'd want to see brought forward, the intended benefits, and also the proposition. I'll just briefly touch on those. Again, I won't go into the detail because you've seen this before. There were 8 design principles that were reflected in the discussion we had at the all-member briefing, and those were built into the business case. And again, you will have seen them in the document that was circulated last week. And then also, of course, the intended benefits, so the why we would want to do this, and those things Mark will speak to in much more detail around whether and how the partnership would deliver the things that we would hope any kind of partnership would, in terms of, again, picking up some of the leaders' language around kind of influence and place leadership and benefits to our communities and businesses. And that's ultimately the test of any proposition for this council. And then finally, in terms of the proposition, so just to reflect on what the leaders have agreed and what has been built into the proposition. So the partnership is about creating a commitment to explore the identified opportunities. It will be underpinned by a legal framework, which is the memorandum of agreement. That's due to be considered by Audit and Standards tomorrow. As mentioned, it does include a proposition to share the chief executive and to create 2 shared deputy chief executives, but also the memorandum of agreement does include the desire to retain sovereignty over decision making. It sets that out very clearly, and also the commitment to review the impact and effectiveness of any partnership within 12 months. So at that point, I'll hand over to Mark to talk to the business case, if that's okay, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Can I just check? Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Building on Ed's introduction, over the next 15-20 minutes, we'll take you through the local context and assumptions that inform the business case, and then move on to the business case itself in terms of the 5 cases, the analysis and findings from each of those. But if we start like any business case should, with the case for change, I'm conscious the leader has already very well explained the first of those challenges around limited strategic influence, so I won't go into the details there around the challenges of being heard. The second specific challenge which has been identified is the current structure of 2 councils operating, having common challenges but limited examples of a common approach to those shared challenges. Ultimately, independently and separately addressing challenges that are affecting both populations, both sets of businesses operating across councils, but with no sort of formal or single approach to those challenges. Thirdly, as already has been mentioned, both councils and including Melton have identified medium to long-term deficits within their financials. That is despite achieving savings and efficiencies over previous years. Added to that, the impact of inflation and the challenges brought around by the autumn statement. This is a sort of ongoing challenge to the financial resilience and sustainability of both councils. Already been touched on as well as the organisational resilience and the challenges around those. Challenges experienced by both councils, but councils more widely across the public sector in terms of recruiting into specialist teams and roles. And I know there's challenges around monitoring officers, particularly in Harborough, which also has challenges around the senior leadership in terms of vacancies, interims and cover arrangements. Additionally, there are single points of failure for numerous statutory functions, essentially one person holding sole responsibility for a statutory function rather than being surrounded by a team. or replacements. And then finally, on an operational level, as already has been mentioned, lots of the council services are operated by small teams, which are specifically susceptible to turnover, to leave, sickness, which has created a challenge, I know, across both councils already and recently. And then finally, both councils having areas of expertise and specialisms, but those not necessarily being shared for the benefit of South and East Leicestershire. Thank you very much, Ed, if you could move us on. It's worth pointing out that we are talking about a strategic partnership, and we're obviously not you're not the only two councils to have these conversations. Numerous councils have established arrangements similar to those being proposed, and I pulled out some learning which has been provided on reflection from senior leaders who have been through this process. So I think each of these has salient points within them which are worth considering, because I think they are appropriate to the local context that both councils are facing at the moment. The first is around that wider role around influence, being a bigger player nationally and having more influence in conversations with government. The top right, I think, is particularly interesting and appropriate. With a combined population, which allows councils collectively to make things happen, but also being small enough to respect local variations in demand and need, essentially being big enough to influence, but being small enough to understand communities and still deliver services that meet needs. There is obviously, on the bottom left now, there is obviously a focus on efficiencies given the financial challenges facing both councils. However, it's important not to forget about the sharing of skills, capacity and capabilities and the impact that can have on organisational and service resilience, but also the benefits that can realise to communities and businesses. And the final point I think has already been touched on, and it's about assuming control and taking control of the situation for the benefit of communities and residents, but also future-proofing the organisation in terms of financial challenges and potential local government restructuring or reorganisation in the future. So these are the words of people, senior leaders who have been through the process, and some of the sort of perceived benefits and advantages of a strategic partnership approach. Thank you, Ed. We're very conscious that between Melton and Harborough councils there has been and are ongoing examples of collaboration. One of those examples which didn't work particularly well has been identified as the sharing of legal services. We've had conversations and are very aware of the sort of lessons learnt work that has been undertaken to provide a sort of case study as to what learning can be taken forward for next time. One learning point in particular, I think that is particularly appropriate for this example is around the absence, when this shared legal service was established, the absence of a shared understanding around the expectations of roles within the service and across both organisations. Now, as Ed has mentioned, the strategic partnership, which is outlined in the business case, is based on a series of design principles, and one of them is clearly around setting out how the partnership would work and how those shared arrangements would be put into practice on a daily basis. And obviously that would include a requirement to demonstrate capacity, roles, responsibilities, and essentially how services would be delivered. Already been touched on is the rich examples of effective joint working currently going on across Leicestershire, including the Building Control Partnership and the Waste Partnership, and the current partnership between Melton and Harborough specifically around out of hours support. These are good examples of joint working currently, which have informed the sort of culture and the joint working between both organisations. So we're not starting from a standing start, obviously, here, because there are good examples of councils working together already. Thank you, Ed. Moving forward then, in terms of assessing the business case and the strategic case particularly, why two councils and why these two councils working together? What we did was to analyse demographics, the inequality profile, infrastructure, and the priorities of both councils to understand whether there are any similarities or points of difference. Now, as already been mentioned this evening, there are shared challenges around ageing population and challenges of retaining and attracting young people into both areas. These are commonly shared challenges. There are some nuances here. It's accepted that Harborough has a significantly larger population and there is a disparity between the two councils, with Harborough being a majority rural population in terms of ONS, Office of National Statistics definitions, compared to Melton with a majority urban population. So these local variances would need to be taken into account, and would be taken into account with any strategic partnership. Both councils experience broadly affluent populations, but there are pockets of deprivation, specifically in urban areas, and that deprivation is specific to income, employment and education. So these are shared challenges, as is the challenge of social isolation. And there are both councils have demonstrated performance which is below national average in terms of gross value added per hour, the measure of productivity, the median weekly wage and skilled unemployment, with Melton specifically having higher levels of low paid jobs. So there are similarities and differences there. From an infrastructure perspective, housing and affordability and availability is a challenge in both, as is connectivity, both from a digital and transport perspectives. And broadly speaking, the 5 of the 7 council priority areas for both councils are broadly similar. One of the obvious differences is the Melton's possession of housing stock and housing revenue account, as opposed to Harborough, which doesn't have one. So there are similarities, but also points of difference which have been recognised through this analysis. Thank you, Ed. I think it's worth, and it's quite timely, just to consider some of the impacts of the autumn statement. There's a quote here from the District Councils Network, which I think is quite powerful, and essentially highlights the challenges as if they needed highlighting, but specifically around the continuation of services such as environmental services, waste collection and leisure, which clearly have an impact and an improvement on everyone's quality of life. So I think that the messaging is quite clear on the back of the autumn statement as to the threats or the challenges associated that are being experienced and will be experienced in the future by frontline services delivered by both councils. Thank you, Ed. And taking that statement forward, what you have in front of you in this diagram is what's being proposed in terms of a phased approach to investigation. The first phase is between January and April 2023. And the proposal and the list of services there, which include, from the last slide, environmental health and licensing services, waste and environment services, and the leisure contract, leisure services. These are areas which are currently in the pipeline for consideration of some level of joint working anyway. So these would be identified as the phase 1 early investigations to assess whether joint working is indeed feasible. Phase 2 on the right hand side is the sort of longer term analysis which would be undertaken, and proposals for these areas such as planning, business support, strategic housing, homelessness and housing need, temporary accommodation and housing development. These would all be developed into business cases which would be considered by both councils, and it's just to stress that no joint working would take place unless both councils independently and individually agreed to that joint working taking place. But what you have in front of you here is a timetable of proposed investigation for areas that have already been thought through to a certain extent, which would be the first proposals for joint working should this move forward. Thank you, Ed. So moving on then to the structure of the business case. The business case is set into 5 cases. What I propose to do is provide an overview of both of the cases, both in terms of analysis and then answering the so what question from the perspective of the councils, communities and businesses, so to really understand the impact or potential impact of a strategic partnership. So if we start with the strategic case, clearly there is a strong case for change. Doing nothing would not realise the benefits, and we'll get to this in a minute, that perceived benefits that the strategic partnership would. There is an alignment with what's being proposed with national legislation and policy, specifically the Section 113 agreement of the Local Government Act, which allows for the sharing of senior management resource. There is a strong alignment between both councils in terms of their strategic priorities, and an alignment broadly in terms of their organisational values. We see both councils obviously having common challenges and regional variants within them that make them unique, but ultimately they are comparable on numerous levels. Both have expertise and capacity, which could be shared across both councils to improve organisational resilience and effectiveness, such as CCTV expertise held by Harborough, which Melton could benefit from, and vice versa, housing expertise currently held within Melton that Harborough could benefit from. Clearly, there's a commitment and an ability across both councils to respect local variance. There is a clear commitment that one size does not fit all, and that the needs of communities and businesses would need to be respected. But taking that, but also there is a similar path and a well-trodden path taken by numerous other districts and borough councils, which leaves us with a growing evidence base of the critical success factors, the benefits, but also the risks associated with this proposal. Thank you, Ed. In terms of the so what, we've already covered the impact of a combined and louder voice, which would result in increased strategic influence. The benefits of single representation at local partnerships, ultimately a shared chief executive officer across both councils representing the population and two councils at, for example, integrated care boards, the rural partnership, and essentially being the single line of contact into partners across the public sector and wider systems is seen as a significant benefit. That would allow for significant potential to address place-based issues and the shared challenges that both councils face. A single voice speaking up for those communities and those businesses and determining the strategic way forward in partnership with both sets of members. But also the establishment of a culture across the organisations to work collectively together to investigate and implement shared arrangements where they benefit both councils and their communities and their businesses. Thank you, Ed. From an economic case perspective, this one's looking at specifically best public value. As has already been touched on by Ed and the leader, there's a clear demonstration of the options considered. Why have we arrived at a strategic partnership as being the option considered by the business case, and why are Melton and Harborough the two identified councils to be part of this proposed partnership? There is a clear investigation line which has been demonstrated by both councils. The memorandum of agreement, which has already been mentioned, provides a clear analysis, clear proposals around cost apportionment, which is fair. It's a 50-50 split on all shared posts. It's worth bearing in mind that both chief executives of the respective councils currently estimate that 30% of their time is spent on external relations. What that means in practice is ultimately they're both having the same conversations with the same stakeholders, often on the same issues, but they're doing it separately, and that is taking up 30% of their time. So a shared CEO role would reduce that sort of 60% to 30%. There are also opportunities for efficiencies and increased productivity. Several examples, I've pulled a few out in terms of potential for sharing legal services, but also, as already mentioned, the leisure centre procurement and the appointment of potentially the appointment of a single operator across the two areas. And in terms of service improvement and resilience, environmental services is a good example of where shared leadership across both councils could be implemented, as well as sharing administrative resource and working together to implement requirements of the Leicestershire Waste Strategy. Thank you, Ed. When we talk about a place-based approach, what we've identified, each of these bullet points is a potential area where common challenges exist across both councils, and where a strategy or an action plan or some form of joint working between both councils could mutually benefit populations and businesses of both areas. So from a regeneration and inclusive growth perspective, through to health and well-being, attracting greater levels of funding and investment, infrastructure, safer communities, climate change, and housing. These are all areas where there is significant potential for joint working to address commonly held challenges across both councils. Thank you, Ed. So in terms of having a strategy and an action plan is great, but actually the so what, from an economic perspective, there are significant potential benefits associated with this joint approach to place leadership, things that really impact on communities and businesses. From a regen and inclusive growth perspective, increased levels of employment, increased average wage, increased number of apprenticeships. From a health and well-being perspective, those pockets of deprivation, there would be shared approaches to addressing the causes and the failures that are resulting in that deprivation. There would be a focus on higher life expectancy and improved quality of life, as well as reduced levels of social isolation. Similarly, for housing, climate change and safer communities, evidence from elsewhere indicates that there are significant benefits of joint working and a place-based strategic approach to addressing common challenges. Thank you, Ed. From a financial perspective, this has already been touched on. The indicative savings from phase 1 and 2 have been identified, as well as the savings for the shared CEO and the shared deputy chief executive, and the costs of change up to this point have also been taken into account. The net savings associated with those proposals over 3 years aggregated up is £231,000. We recognise that over a 3-year period, there is a deficit identified within the medium-term financial strategy. Prudently, it's only right to accept that those savings would not offset the deficit. However, they would get up to about 31% of that deficit, which in itself is sizable, but obviously is not the panacea to that particular problem, but it certainly could be part of the solution. Thank you, Ed. From a commercial case perspective, so just in terms of jargon, the commercial case really looks at the nature of the deal on the arrangement that would be in place between both councils, but also what's necessary to create the conditions to maximise the impact and the benefits of the strategic partnership arrangement. What's being proposed within the proposition is a bespoke governance arrangement, which can be implemented and has been implemented elsewhere, and would provide the management and leadership of the strategic partnership. Now, clearly that's officer-led, but also politically led by both sets of members. Council sovereignty and independence would be maintained. Councils would still make decisions on the way they do now in terms of policy decisions and investment and funding decisions. There is a clear approach to cost apportionment within the memorandum of agreement, and there is a defined process involving members from both councils in terms of agreeing and sharing, agreeing shared priorities and approaches. There would be the requirement, given the shared new roles, the chief executive and the 2 deputy chief executive officers, they're not currently reflected in the council pay statements and pay structures, so those would need to be changed, but there is potential provision there. And also there's significant potential for joint commissioning and procurement to implement that place-based approach to addressing common challenges. Thank you, Ed. So what would that mean in practice? There's something here about pace, realising benefits at pace, given the framework and the structure that will be provided by the strategic partnership. That pace would be accelerated compared to current arrangements. It would also provide a programme which would be managed, would be scrutinised, and would be provided with oversight from elected members from both councils. As I've already mentioned, the investigation process would be based on a business case approach, which would assess the benefits and risks associated with any proposal from the perspectives of the councils, respectively, and their communities and businesses. There's opportunities around a shared workforce strategy with benefits around the retention rates, as through improved service resilience and growth, job enrichment, development and progression opportunities would be created. And also from a recruitment perspective, currently the councils are operating separately, so in essence are competing against each other. A strategic partnership with a shared workforce strategy would allow both councils to work together to recruit the best applicants and not compete against one another. And as we've already discussed, the increased purchasing power created by a partnership. One example is the leisure procurement opportunity there, which could create efficiencies in terms of the contract value, but also further down the line in terms of contract management and so on. There are demonstrable efficiencies that could be realised. Thank you, Ed. From a management case, this is the how. The proposed structure in the proposition is for the shared CEO and the shared deputy chief executive officers. Those roles and responsibilities are defined. Line management arrangements are defined. Potential for future structural changes during phase 1 associated with a changed senior leadership structure that would have to be worked through and a business case developed. There's obviously a need for executive and transformational support. These programs will not run themselves, and There is a proposal in phase 1 to map existing transformational capacity and capabilities across both councils, but also to look forward and understand what capacity and requirements are needed to implement this strategic partnership, should it be approved. As already has been touched on, there's a 12-month review process, which would be an objective analysis of the performance of the strategic partnership against the intended benefits which have been identified by both councils. And post local elections 2023, there would be an annual review there would be a performance review undertaken to inform members of the progress made to date. As has already been mentioned, there's a clear exit strategy identified within the memorandum of agreement, and that identifies the necessary provisions and resolutions which would need to be undertaken. But there is evidence of that happening elsewhere when things haven't worked out. So once again, we have a well-trodden path in terms of establishment and potential exit if required. Thank you, Ed. So in terms of so what, there is a facility and provision to investigate a range of services. There's the new staffing structure, which would be implemented with clear line management responsibilities. There's also a requirement to management of risks, of which I'll get onto on the next slide. So Ed, if you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. So I talked a lot about benefits. I've talked a lot about what the proposals would look like. Clearly, from a prudent and objective perspective, we need to look at risks. What we've done is to identify some of the key strategic risks, the first of which is the failure to identify a clear shared vision, objectives and goals across both councils. The memorandum of agreement and the business case identify a series of design principles, which both councils have been involved in the development of. That's your framework, and within which to agree shared vision, objectives and goals. It's not a given, but the role of cabinets, the shared strategy board and the senior leadership teams in terms of developing a shared vision based on common challenges is an opportunity as well as a risk. Perception of unfairness or imbalance, particularly around the apportionment of costs. Well, the memorandum of agreement is very clear in terms of the mechanisms for apportioning costs, and those are set clearly out. So there may be some variance and some discussions needed further down the line, but there is a fair parity in terms of what's being proposed. The issue of managing local variance, staff not being local, or a one-size-fits-all approach across both council areas. It is a risk, but actually a shared approach to common challenges doesn't mean that there is this one size fits all. Elected members will still remain accountable to their communities and will obviously be involved in decision making around shared opportunities. So it's within your gift to ensure that proposals meet the needs of your communities. And obviously each Deputy Chief Executive Officer will be allocated to each council, as well as having thematic lead on cross issues, but ultimately those Deputy Chief Executive Officers will be able to ensure that local focus is provided where required. Thank you, Ed. And the final risks, a lack of capacity and capability to implement the transformation effectively. There is, as I've already mentioned, phase 1, a requirement to map existing capacity and capabilities and to identify future requirements and make sure that the transformation function is well resourced. And to confirm the business case approach to investigation so that both councils are able to set the parameters in which what good looks like. And the final risk is around the inability to realise savings, which is an obvious risk, but one that I think will be offset by obviously the fact that if this is implemented, the savings associated with the shared chief executive and the shared deputy chief executives, those savings would be realised at the point of implementation. And then the business case approach moving forward, it would be up to officers to demonstrate to members that benefits can be realised, both financial, but also from the perspectives of communities and businesses. And there is a clear governance arrangement in place to provide that oversight and scrutiny. Thank you, Ed. So in summary, what we've tried to do is on one slide to summarise the business case for the strategic partnership, compare it to the do nothing or the continuation of existing arrangements. Based on the intended benefits or the required benefits identified by both councils, you can see that strategic partnership performs well in terms of the demonstrable ability and potential to achieve those, whereas the do nothing continuation of existing requirements, it's not all red, but actually there's there is a stark difference between the perceived performance of the strategic partnership and that of the continuation of current arrangements. Okay, thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you, Mark. And just to finish, then I mentioned I was going to reflect on the staff engagement process. So obviously, as part of the discussion that's taken place following the cabinet decision, we've kept our colleagues involved and informed in the development of the business case. We actually held a joint briefing with both councils a week or so ago, and just wanted to seek colleagues' view really on what they thought the opportunities might be and any concerns or questions they might have. I just wanted to share some headlines from that. So it was quite telling in terms of the engagement that we had from the conversation. There was 92 separate ideas provided during the staff engagement across both councils, and you can just see a couple of quotes there that I've captured on the slides. And then at the bottom, you can see the kind of various ideas and options that were being suggested that were helpfully kind of reflected back into the business case. So just give that assurance to members around staff engagement in the process. And the final slide on this point was just around how people felt. One of the things we were keen to understand is how people felt about the strategic partnership from a staff perspective. Obviously, any change can be destabilizing, and that's always something I've been very keen on ensuring organisation this was considered, that we didn't destabilize or get knocked off track. And actually what was reassuring in terms of the way we have engaged and the propositions that have been discussed with staff is there was a good deal of positivity, and you can see most people actually responded out of 111 responses on the certainly more positive side, and at this stage very few being anxious or worried about what was being proposed, which was reassuring and certainly something we were very keen to maintain, that this is seen as a positive thing if it was going to be seen, if it was going to proceed. And so just finally a few considerations really, and just to draw out a few of the things that Mark has highlighted that I think are certainly worthy of members' consideration this evening, in terms of the potential to address sectoral issues. So sometimes we struggle in certain areas to recruit, so planning and also retain officers, because there is a real sectoral challenge. So it's whether this gives us the opportunity to address some of those things. The challenge of small teams that's been mentioned, buying power, being more influential in strategic discussions, and also the financial challenge, which again has been set out today. So just a few things, I suppose, to draw your attention to as you consider the business case, and then also the protections that again, based on the conversations we've had so far, have been very important in terms of building in protections for MBC, so around sovereignty, around making sure we have exit clauses, so if things don't work, it can be unpicked and we can revert back to the status quo. And also, as I said, through the design principles, the intention that if this is going to proceed, it needs to be seen in a positive light, as a positive partnership, and that's the only way it would be of benefit, I think, to the council and our communities. So I think that is now the final slide, just to summarise the next steps really, which I think hopefully are fairly well clear to you. So a couple of dates I recognise are wrong, actually. It should be the 6th of December and 20th of December, but those are the dates for the final consideration by Cabinet and Council. So I'll come off screen share and hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed. Just before we go on to the debate, Councillor Holmes wants to just raise something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have never, ever, in all the time that I have been a councillor, had to listen to somebody speaking from behind a screen and not being there. I think it is a disgrace. I think that we are treated not like decent people. I just think if he is being paid what is being paid, then he should be here and we could have debate. I think it is totally and utterly wrong. I don't know what anybody else feels. I don't really care. But I just think that it is absolutely disgraceful, and I feel that we shouldn't carry on when we've got something like this and he can't even be there, and he is supposed to be there to help, and he is a consultant that obviously doesn't want to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the debate then. Who am I asking the questions to? Directly to you, Ed.
I think if you want to funnel them through me, Chair, obviously I'm here to serve the meeting and to support councillors in navigating the business case. Obviously, I'm joined by other officers
Right.
and by colleagues on the screen. Just to respond to Councillor Holmes's point around people being visible, there is an issue with colleagues not always being visible on screen because of the YouTube feed. I have no doubt that colleagues, if they're invited, either Mark or Nathan, to respond to questions, they'll be very happy to come on screen and support the meeting in any way they can.
He wants to be here.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
he should be here in person.
Yeah.
We are paying that man. He should be here in person. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just say something? I've got to back Elaine up
Yeah.
there. It's like members briefing. The consultant should have been here.
You've
so
made
we
your
could round
point,
the
Councillor
table.
Carter.
Thank
You
you.
know, if we can move
I
on.
agree with her.
Right, with the business case, on pages 142 and 143, I'm a bit mystified. Just hold on a moment. Yeah, so 142 and 143, the costs are being apportioned. The costs are being proportioned between Harbour and Melton at 50-50, okay? When other options like population, council tax, geographic area clearly show it 65-35 or 66-34. This seems to me we're quite clearly being at disadvantage, and Harbour are considerably great gaining. Why is 50-50 seen as the rationale? I can't get my head around this.
Thanks, Chair. I think I'm going to invite Nathan just to respond to that. Nathan has obviously worked with the leaders in terms of addressing the apportionment. So I'll invite Nathan to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and apologies, members, that we're having to come off screen when we're not speaking. That's, as Ed just outlined, it's because of your YouTube feed. I think if we're on screen, that dominates otherwise what you might be able to see. So my apologies that you can't see us all the time, but we are here supporting you. So in relation to the 50-50 question, as you rightly said, Chair, there are a number of options that could be considered for sharing the costs of the services within the proposed strategic partnership. It was felt that in sharing the staff that are proposed as the initial phase, so the sharing of the chief executive and the sharing of 2 deputy chief executives, but effectively 1 deputy chief executive in each authority, the fairest starting point was to share that 50-50. So that in terms of the role that Ed would be doing for you as chief executive, representing your interests in external meetings, and as Mark outlined earlier, that 30% of a chief executive's time, it was felt that if Ed's representing that on an equal proportion, he is doing that on an equal basis for both councils. So you're absolutely right. And if the partnership were to be agreed on the 20th of December, other options for service areas or the sharing of staff would be considered, where it would be more appropriate, where adopting a principle of population share or geography size or council tax base would be more appropriate to adopt for those services. But in relation to the sharing of one deputy chief executive and the chief executive, it was felt the best way of sharing that to start the partnership was on a 50-50 basis, so that both councils, and particularly for Melton, had an equal share in that team. If another methodology had been chosen, you may be considering this evening why you would only be sharing a chief executive, but your chief executive would only be giving you 30% of their time, and 60% of that would be with Harbour. So we felt that to start the partnership in the right basis, the 50-50 sharing was the right basis to start with, and is a common starting place for those authorities that have shared a senior management team at the beginning of their partnership.
when you say we felt, who is the we? Is it you or who are you talking about, Nathan, when you say we felt?
Yeah, good question. Good question, Chair. So in terms of the we is the consideration of the leaders and deputy leaders as part of the early proposals to develop the business case. But obviously, as my role as strategic advisor and having advised other authorities that have set up partnerships, in terms of what has been more effective in setting up those partnerships, the majority of those partnerships have set that partnership basis up on a 50-50 sharing of a small team as is proposed at the moment. So the we I'm alluding to is the we consideration of the expertise that I bring to that consideration. But in conversation with both leaders and deputy leaders, we felt, so the collective we of what was being proposed for the cost sharing that's presented to you this evening, we being the collective, the advice that's been provided by myself and the political input into that process, felt that that was the right basis to start with.
Councillor Holmes, did you want to go in relation to that point? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand. If you were here, we could actually talk to you, couldn't we? And there are several things that I just feel that, you know, you're not here, are you? You're on a screen. Is that what's going to happen? You've mentioned the chief exec. So the chief exec lives the other side, Nottingham. And I understand our deputy is in Lincolnshire. Is this the sort of thing that's going to happen? That everybody's going to be on a screen or what?
I can't speak about the arrangements that you already have with your chief executive and deputy chief executive. I'm sure they'll be able to cover that
for now.
themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Yourself, Nathan, then, could you go to page 158? I assume I'm still firing at yourself. Now, as I said at the briefing, I was a finance person. I can see where you're getting the savings from the first two lines, right? i.e. a net of 25,000 for each of the next 3 years. But the figure on row 3 of 187,579, where is that plucked from? Because phase 1 and 2 isn't yet under, it's still out for collaboration. So why haven't we seen a business case, please, to substantiate that? I would have expected a business case to produce ahead of this, not at a later stage. And you say you're going to produce it between March, April time. Really? It's elections then. And I can't see it being complete during that period. So I would really, the only question I can really ask you is how robust is that 187,579? Because it's clearly, there's no clarity to that. Thank you.
So perhaps, Chair, I mean, I can answer that from your strategic advisor perspective, and perhaps I'll bring Mark in to do the detail. But you're absolutely right, Chair. When you look at slide 158, you're looking at two possibilities that exist within the business case. So the business case is setting out for you a range of considerations based on decisions that you have yet to take. You have yet to take the decision whether you want to go into strategic partnership. So all the figures on this page, none of these figures are achievable unless that decision is taken. But what we're showing is...
So really, Nathan, that 231 saving of 31.5% may not be achieved.
if you allow me to finish,
Sorry.
Robert. So the first set of savings that are shown on for the chief executive and the deputy chief executive, the proposal that is being considered in the business case only takes you as far as approving, so subject to the council decisions on the 20th, approving the sharing of a chief executive and the sharing of a deputy chief executive. If that decision is taken on the 20th of December, those savings become real savings that you could put into your budget, because that decision is being taken within your council. The decisions that are set out on line 3 that arrive at the 187,579 figure, those are the possible savings that you could achieve looking at the range of services that you could share and the benefits that you could bring to your organisations based on the sharing of those services that have been achieved in other organisations and what's being delivered. But really important point that you're making, Chair, those decisions aren't being proposed at the council meeting, and those decisions will come back for future consideration and future scrutiny. But it sets out for you the possibility that could be achieved by going into partnership, such as with Harborough. So it would be remiss in terms of producing the financial case if it didn't highlight to you what you could achieve. But it is really important to say that it's not being proposed that those savings that are linked to the phase 1 and phase 2 services that were outlined earlier by Mark. You're not making that decision or scrutinising that decision this evening, and you're certainly not making that decision come the 20th of December, because as you rightly say, you would want to consider each of those decisions and each of those options both as a policy decision, as an executive decision, but also the ability to scrutinise those and take those forward. But it is important that we set out for you what the potential of the financial savings would be, so that you can realise what considerations might be taken into account for making that decision to go into a strategic partnership. So just to summarise, the savings on the chief executive and the deputy chief executive would be achievable, and they are part of the decisions that are being recommended to council on the 20th of December. Phases 1 and 2 savings are there as illustration, but they're based on good evidence from elsewhere that shows you what you could achieve by going into partnership.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Nathan. Just to pick up on the Chair's point, I think we're struggling to understand the methodology behind you reaching that figure. How have you come to that 187,000 figure? I appreciate there are decisions yet to come, but in this instance now, how have you come to that very precise figure?
It may be worth bringing
did you want to
Mark
outline
at
that, Mark?
point. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the methodology, we've through the business case process, we've worked with both councils and sat down and undertaken a service diagnostic. So that is every service which is delivered by both of the councils. We have identified whether there are any potential or no potential savings, some potential savings, so high, medium or low, and where there are potential savings, each council has got to a figure in terms of what possible savings could be realised and what would need to be done to realise those savings. That work and that information is included within page 110 onwards of the business case, where you can see the outputs from that service diagnostic process. We then undertook a financial analysis which compared the proposed savings levels with the current budgets to arrive at indicative figures for the potential savings during phase 1 and 2, and those are the figures that are included within page 158 of the business case. So it's a service diagnostic which has been undertaken by both councils to identify opportunities for savings and then map those based on which phase they are allocated to.
And Chair, if I just might add to what Mark.
Sorry, can I just come back? On those pages, there are no figures. It just says high, low, medium, none in terms of potential financial savings. I would think it would have been beneficial for the committee to have seen some kind of raw figures in terms of where these savings are, because at the moment it's just semantics in terms of, well, we might be able to find some savings here. There's a medium possibility or a low possibility or a high possibility of savings. But what are the raw figures? I think that would have been beneficial for the committee to have seen.
I can't get my head around this 187. It's really the major part of the 231.
I mean, you guys could have just made it up. I don't know, because you haven't given me the figures. You just said it's basically a bit like a risk analysis, isn't it?
Help out, Ed, here.
Just I might ask Dawn just to come in a moment. So there is a spreadsheet, I understand, against the various propositions in the business case. So against the phase one proposals or suggestions, and bear in mind these are suggestions and potential areas and indicative savings at the stage. They're not commitments or confirmed positions, but there is a breakdown of that number that obviously leads to the assumptions that are before you. So that's certainly something we can take away, and it may be Dawn. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that's what's built up the detail of that. Yeah, and I think that's not an issue.
To truly comment and to see
I don't
to
think
realise
really,
what these savings mean for us and the benefit of those savings, we need to see those figures tonight.
Well,
so we can then feed into cabinet to say, yes, we think these savings are achievable, and we think we should go for this, because that is the main crux of this piece for me tonight, is the potential savings that we as a council are going to make. The other things are sparkly, they're nice to have, you know, in terms of you being there, Ed, as the Joint Chief Executive, going into the ICB, making the case for Melton to have a second surgery. You know, those issues that they're built off the back of this. But for me, these savings are important because the future proofing of local government is important. We're at a crossroads here. Cuts are coming. One council is bound to go bust in the county in the next 10 years. We're going to be forced to do something. Are we proactive about this and we go into this strategic partnership, or do we sit back and wait to be forced by a new government in 2024? Who knows, to do something different. But for me, these savings are important, and we're future-proofing our services, and we need to see those figures. If we're going through a budget process now, which we're going to have to do in January, we need to take account of these potential savings. We need to be thinking about that in, you know, next month when we start thinking about the budget, and when the cabinet start thinking about the budget, when Dawn starts thinking about the budget. But as members, we need to be seeing these figures.
Do you want to add something to that?
Well, I just want to, I'll agree with Jacob, with what Jacob said, which was some of what I was going to say. But just reading through this and keep reading through it, we're rescuing Harborough. They're not doing us any favours. And that, it comes over overwhelmingly. And this, in all but words, is a unitary authority agreement, and they didn't want a unitary authority.
Back on Nathan's point then, Ed, please.
Yeah, if you don't mind, thank you. So I think in terms of the figures underpinning the numbers in the business case, so I don't think there's any issue with sharing those. I'm not sure we've got them available to share this evening, but we can certainly make them available. Bear in mind, of course, this is not the end of the process, it's the start of the process in terms of reviewing it. And the purpose of today is about trying to understand what it is you want to be able to make a decision. So if there are things that are missing, then there is no issue with sharing those. The other thing I would say and reiterate is this is about setting out the potential opportunities the partnership could explore. So these are not confirmed numbers, they are indicative, and they are potential opportunities that could be taken forward. So they wouldn't at this stage be in a position to be built into the budget for the next year. They are things that will be explored in terms of investigating both phase one and phase two. So that's something that the business case seeks to make clear. If it doesn't, then I would want it to make it clearer, because there's a risk, of course, in committing to things that then aren't deliverable, that then we have an issue. But what, as has been said, through the evaluation work done by Mark with the various teams in terms of options and opportunities, that's what let's try to set out, where these things could be delivered, and ultimately the things are work in progress in terms of what we've been able to achieve over the last couple of months.
I mean, I did make my point clear there, though, Ed. I did say that they were indicative at the very start. You know, I understand that. But what I was at, see a business case, and there isn't one available.
No, sorry, Chair, just to be clear, yeah, the business cases will come back in future. So before anything happened on particular services, they would come back. So there is no detail in terms of those future options. Yeah, sure. Sorry, Chair, just I don't know whether Dawn, you want to just come in at all, if you can add any detail to this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I mean, if members want, I do know the numbers that have fed into that, those amounts. If you want me to quickly run through those, I mean, I know that's difficult talking verbally. If that would be helpful.
Actually see them. So if you just leave it for now, yeah. Councillor Evans.
Hi there. Yeah, obviously this is one of the most important moments arguably in Melton's history of recent times, and this is a big decision. Like Jacob, it's like we're seeing a train coming down the track and we know it's coming down the track, and do we, what do we do? Unitary keeps getting mentioned, comes back, but like Pam, I mean, I look at these, this is not, sorry, I've got enough, this is not a business case. This is a marketing flyer. This has got green dots, red dots. It's got no detail in it. It's got no figures with substantial elements in it. And I hate to say this, and Ed's looking at me, I know hard here. One of the only major ways to save money in a council, because it's a big expenditure, is staff. That's where most of the, that's the only, because we've got parks, so you've got assets, sure, but they're just capital. The biggest saving, and if you look at this business case, the first saving is on staff, by sharing staff. And in the end, if you keep looking through this, we'll be sharing all our senior staff, planning, even housing, everything, all of it. And yet, if you look at the structure of it too, it's different. At the moment, Harborough has got a completely different structure at its top end compared to where we are. We've got a formation which is 1-5. They've got one that's, oh no, they've got 1-5. We've got 1-3-6. It's like two football teams getting together with different formations. I know that Joe will know that doesn't work. I mean, I've jokingly said to Ed, have you not had a job for the last few years? If you can do 50% of your work there and 50% of your work here, we are losing you, Ed. I'm not happy about losing half your time and thinking, and I know I'll say this with Joe, we've made massive improvements in this council in the last few years. And what we're doing is we're improving every year. Housing, look at what we've done in housing, brilliantly. And I've already said to Michelle, if you think I want to lose you, 50% of you, you've got another thing coming, because I don't want to lose the officers we've got here. And that's what worries me. This will mean our key officers will be spending 50% of the time, including, yes, the monitoring officer, 50% of the time looking at cases elsewhere. That means for us, we're losing, yes, we're saving money, but we're losing officers. We're losing the people at the top at the moment as a team. I think we're like Forest. We're getting better and better, and we're starting to compete with the big teams now, because I think we're doing it. And I just personally, I worry. This document, all it does is repeat the same subjects. And I'm afraid I'm not of a mind where little green and red spots are going to do it for me. And the one thing that isn't really in this document, and you, Steve, has said it, and you've alluded to it, and Chair, you've alluded to it, is in 6 months' time, all bets could be off. And yet we'll be halfway down the tracks. And we don't want it maybe, but there could be a different political flavour. And it should be in this document. It is the biggest risk in this document, because Harborough could turn around in 6 months' time and so don't like any of that. Ed knows, he's been with us in this long enough. When political partnerships change, when new politicians come in, as they will be here in 6 months' time, they might have different aims. You know, the ring road, for instance, could be different. They could say, no, that's not a priority, the Southern Ring Road. We want to do this. And that's their right. It's the right of all members. And that's the concern I have here. We're going to lose, and that anybody who comes in who's new, and Steve said to this before the meeting, is going to look at it and say, where's it all gone? And I have also, and I'm rabbiting on, the one thing I'd say to Ed, hold on a second. What if you go to a meeting and your leader in Melton says, this is what I want, and the leader in Harborough says, no, I want this? You're going to sit there, Ed, and you're going to be in an awkward position. It's good where we're shared and together, But if you have two people saying, no, I don't want to do that, this is the priority, the Melton Ring Road, and Harborough said, no, I want this to be the priority, you're in an incredibly difficult position, because you're going to say, would I do put the capital in Harborough, or do I put it in Melton? And that's the problem, because this isn't really a unitary authority. At least with the unitary authority, we're all joined together. I understand, and you know where you are, Ed. You represent Melton and Harborough, full stop. And politically, it's all one. Here, we're sort of sellotaped together, and that sellotape to me isn't very strong. And that's what worried me. In this document, I'm sorry, I've tried like you, Pam, to go through it. All I do is I keep seeing repeated the same things over and over again. This should have been about 10% of this sort, and it should have been real facts. And if it means sharing staff like planning officers, yeah, fine, put it in, but I want facts. I don't want this generic wishy-washy stuff. I'm sorry, it doesn't do it for me. And I know that maybe this partnership will go through, cabinet in favour of it. But I will want before, and this is the other thing, I'm rabbiting really badly now, the rush is really, and I know other members are feeling this, the rush to do this in a few months is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Some members will not be able to make them, probably one of the most important full council meetings that's come along because it's just before Christmas. And if you look at also, you know, Ed, you've said nothing will be compromised. All our dates for these meetings, arguably Harborough would say the same, have been dictated to by the other council because we're having to hold them at the same time. And the other thing that's not in this document, which is unbelievable, is when you join together, just like when we joined the EU, you have to have joint meetings. You have to have expenses because of that. You have to, everything starts, you have to have more consultants. There's no costs here at all of this new partnership. New partnerships cost money. They always cost money. Where is it, Mark? Where is it in this? I see nothing which says we're going to save money, but I suspect the actual money we're saving will go in employing consultants, new staff meetings, and all the rest of it. That's my concern. I've had a rant. I know this still may go ahead because I know that the cabinet all want this, but I think we really deserve, as scrutiny, to have facts, not generic statements, as Ed has said, and we haven't got time for that. But even your staff cannot produce all the facts in the time before because we haven't got a chance for another meeting. This is it. And I know that Harborough said the same thing, not enough detail. Where's the detail? Where are the facts?
Chair, can I respond to some of those points, if that's okay? And I may invite Nathan or Mark in a moment just to respond to some of them. So I think the issue around you talked around kind of effectiveness of the senior team and our ability to respond to challenges. And I think that's something I'll be keen for Nathan to share his experience of. Obviously, we have through this process spoken to other councils who've operated in these partnerships. And I know we've got an all-member briefing on Thursday, which hopefully will be helpful as well, because again, much better to hear from people who are going through this and have lived and breathed this and actually address some of those issues. So I think that will be useful. The election risk is something that as officers, we are always acutely aware of. I mentioned to you recently, we respect and recognise that any council can change its political leadership every 4 years, and that may lead to a change in direction. The memorandum of agreement does include within the termination clause, the ability to review and to exit within 6 months. So it creates the opportunity if both councils or either council at that stage felt it wasn't for them, then they can withdraw at that stage. And it also includes through the exit arrangements, the ability to revert back to status quo. So certainly in the early stages, the ability to unpick it are relatively straightforward. Obviously, the more integration, the longer it goes on for, the more challenging that becomes. But again, I know Nathan can share his experience of how to manage that process. In terms of the rush, I think the detail around the timescales obviously was set out in the cabinet report, and the timescales were agreed with our leaders. And there's some practicalities around that in terms of recognising that Harbour have invited us to explore this with them, and they were keen to have a resolution by the end of the year. Similarly, obviously, as you touched on, or has been touched on today, the election is a factor, and that's something we need to pay attention to as well. I think ultimately, in terms of the detail we've done, for members to be able to make a decision on what's in front of them at the moment, which is simply around entering a partnership that creates a framework to explore opportunities, and as part of that, sharing 3 initial roles. I'm not sure there's much more we could do for you at the moment, other than obviously respect and feed in the detail that's been asked for. I'm not sure we could do much more in terms of the detail. What you need beyond establishing the partnership is then the business cases to come through. And a key part of that, and a key bit, just again to respond to your point around alignment, is through the strategy board. So the governance is set up so that there are partnership structures that would allow hopefully alignment to be created, so that both leaders and cabinets can build a shared agenda. And obviously Mark has set out through his analysis some of those areas where there could be benefits in doing that. So this is about creating a framework and then exploring opportunities together, and that's the basis upon which the business case has been built. Nathan or Mark, I don't know if you wanted to come in and pick up any of those points in more detail at all.
I think just, Ed, if I may, just to reflect back on the comments that the Scrutiny Committee have already said, because I think your debate is a good one. And I think the debate really in a nutshell is there is a train coming down the track, to quote someone from earlier, and it's how you want to respond to that train coming down the track. The option that you have in the business case is to respond to that by going into a strategic partnership. Yes, there will be some compromise in going into that partnership, as in sharing your chief executive, but that gives you the benefits, the financial benefits that are set out in the business case. But it is a legitimate strategic decision, as members reflected on this evening, about whether you wish to position your organisation, your council, in partnership to respond to that financial challenge, and that challenge that may come from different policy directions within the current government, or you wish to do it in a different way. But in a nutshell, that's your choice. And the business case is presenting that choice to you this evening, that says if you go down the response to that train coming down the track by adopting a shared partnership, these are the benefits and opportunities that this opens up to you that would otherwise not be available to you without pursuing that partnership arrangement. So if the decision on the 20th is to not go ahead with the partnership, those benefits would not be open to you, and you would have to come up as a group of members with another solution to those challenges that you're well aware of. And I'm sure that as members since 2010, you've battled with those challenges, for over nearly 20 years. So those challenges will remain and will continue for the next decade. And I think it's important that you strike that balance between, is that the strategic direction that we wish to go down with these benefits and opportunities that will otherwise not be available to us in the business case. And the comments that were made earlier, were really good comments. I didn't take that as there was lots of really good points made earlier, and it is important that in all those decisions, you do as a council only have certain areas that you can make savings and efficiencies from, and rightly suggested, your staffing is one of those, your accommodation is others, the services that you provide. And the simple question is, are you better at providing those services and sharing those costs in a partnership domain, where you have still got that decision making to make at a local level through your sovereign powers of decision making that remain intact as part of the construct of this proposal? Or are you going to be in a position in future years where you can't balance those budgets, or local government reorganisation comes along and you don't have a say? And I think that's the strategic decision for this evening, is as members, you serve your local communities. Of course you do. That's why you're elected, to serve your local communities, and serving your local communities' interests. Which is the best way to take that forward? By having a partnership that, as Ed has just outlined, if things change next May, you haven't committed to a huge amount of investment in each other, so that you can exit from that arrangement if you wish. But if if the politics doesn't change, or even if that politics does change, those conditions in which you need to make decisions as local government still exist. And though the choice for you this evening in terms of scrutiny is whether this is the better choice in those really difficult circumstances that I know members face every day. So I think that's the crux. The debate's been a good debate, but the crux of it is this the better option compared to other options? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to put forward that we adjourn this meeting until we get a proper business case. Because to me, this is not a business case. I don't mind whether, Vice Chairman, whether a decision has to be made tonight or not. The calendar will have to be adjusted. If we went to we as farmers borrow a lot of money off banks. We couldn't go to the bank with this and get money. No way could we. We want a proper case. Where's this 231,528 come from? Because I don't know. I don't think Councillor Evans knew.
I think that was the question I raised. We've had.
Well,
Did
it's
you-
sort of answer.
Yeah,
that's
that's
all.
right. That's what I meant to say.
I mean, there's so many unanswered questions here. It's inevitable that the staffing's got to slim down at both authorities.
Yeah.
We've heard tonight that joint working's been successful with Harborough. Well, I would dispute that. We had double yellow lines put round Bottisford 25, 30 years ago. The county council went mad. We had traffic enforcement officers come from Market Harborough for about a year, 18 months, and never been seen since. People parked with impunity on double yellow lines. The county council re-tarmacked the high street, and the straightaway came afterwards and put the yellow lines back, but everybody still parks on them. We never seen an enforcement officer. That's joint working that's successful. Well, come on,
Yeah.
that's not joint working that's successful.
The monitoring officer wanted to just respond there.
I just wanted to clarify, Chair, that actually there's no decision to be made by this committee tonight. The report is for noting, and all comments made by the Scrutiny Committee will be fed into Cabinet. So on that basis, there is no decision to be adjourned.
We know from the agenda that it's points to be noted, but we have the right to make take a vote or to defer it. I as I see it, you don't agree.
There's no decision to be made by the Scrutiny Committee, Chair. All comments made by Scrutiny will be fed into Cabinet on the 6th of December.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I take it that every member of this council has had this? Or is it only the Scrutiny Committee? Because this is for every member that actually does care about their community. And this is a massive thing.
As far as I'm aware, it's the Cabinet have had a copy and the members of Scrutiny. I'm not aware anybody else has.
How can we can we
But-
do this? What and why the rush?
Can I
This-
just
Yeah.
confirm, Councillor Holmes?
Yes.
Every member, the Scrutiny Committee agenda and the Audit and Standards Committee agenda were published. An email went round to all members advising that those agendas had been published and the business case was ready. So all members have access to the business case that you've just referred to. It will be fed in to Cabinet with scrutiny and audit comments on the 6th, and all members will be asked to make a decision at Council on the 20th of December.
If I could come back, so all members are going to read this on the internet, are they? I mean, it's ludicrous.
I don't think any hard copy.
I mean, there's no hard copies for people. It's a big decision. Everybody ought to know. If you are talking about finances, we really must know. And we've brought up things. And I just think, why rush?
The monitoring
wrong
officer.
meeting.
Let's just
Thank
hear
you.
from the monitoring officer.
Councillor Holmes, as with any meeting and papers, all members have been are able to collect hard copies. Some of our members do prefer reading documents online, and to just make clear, hard copies are available for all members on request.
Yeah,
Yeah, Chair, just I think to again give some reassurance to members. So the decision that ultimately would go before council would be about the establishment of a framework and the potential to consider opportunities, and then the sharing of 3 roles at that point. I'm not sure there is anything further we could provide you with at this stage on top of what you've already got that sets out the proposition and the implications arising from that. Now, clearly there are details we can pick up, and we're happy to elaborate on any questions you have today. But in terms of fundamentally developing the details of business cases around particular services, that's something that obviously we wouldn't have time to do in advance of that. And that's why these are phased investigations. So the emphasis is on creating a framework and then developing some phased investigations. So I just wanted to make that point clear, Chair. Thank you.
Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're just getting a bit silly now about deferring things, but the scrutiny is to feed into Cabinet to make the decision. I'm broadly in favour of a strategic partnership. I want to clarify that, but I wanted to see more detail. If it's just the initial framework, then these numbers here, whilst good to see at this stage, take us down a different path where we aren't at yet. That's my concern. We should have just been presented, for me personally, we should have just been presented with the business case for that initial phase, not all of this stuff, because this is just overcomplicated. This massive document has overcomplicated the proposition.
And that's the point.
And I think that's the frustration of members tonight.
Yeah.
If it was just, we're sharing a CEO, we've got 2 deputy CEOs, deputy chief execs, that's the starting point. And then in the new year, we'll start to get things going, see how we can move things forward with the strategic partnership. I think members would have broadly been happy with that. But I think this, a load of money on consultants, has just muddied the water about what we're really trying to achieve with this. And I think that's the frustration that I'm certainly feeling. And I feel personally, and that's what I feel the committee is getting to. Because we spend a lot of money on consultants, and to come up with that initial framework, we didn't need to spend 50 grand. It's a political decision ultimately, with a small bit of apparatus behind it. So I think we need to just, from this business case needs to be slimmed down massively, and it just needs to focus on that key element of the decision that we are going to be making at full council on the 20th.
But
because this figure is great, 187,000, and it being 30%, but that's kind of coming down the line after full council. Let's focus on what the decision actually is going to be.
But that was the point I made half an hour ago. If we'd have the business case, so we've been going round in circles, and that was it. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I also found the document very lengthy, also very idealistic. It sounded more like obviously it was a vision. But it's very lengthy, and I had to cut through it to find the problem areas that I was needing to bring into the arena tonight. I personally feel there is a strong case for change, because there is a large deficit ahead of us in Melton, as there is in a lot of councils across the country. I think this is a good attempt to try and future-proof and plan ahead for our council and for all the residents of Melton. I wondered what there is to lose to try this. I think it's difficult not to be hypothetical at this stage. I think it's very difficult to put together a business case with exact amounts, because how can you monitor this against something that will have been superseded? So we won't be able to compare as we go along. But I do think, as Joe said, there is nothing. To do nothing is not an option. I just think we have to try this or something else. If not this, something as radical, as quite strongly, probably even revolutionary. But I think the efficiencies and increased productivities, as outlined in this document, are encouraging. Shared roles that can reduce jobs and savings. just reading through my notes here. We've got possible bespoke governance arrangements, the joint procurement and commissioning, increased purchasing power. We've got more clout overall throughout the country if we join with Market Harbour, indeed, if we join with anyone. It'll help to recruit around the specialist roles and the problems around the small teams, such as the sickness and increased turnaround we're experiencing at the moment. So I can really see benefits joining with any council. That I do support this actually quite largely. What I think a problem could be around this monitoring. What does success look like? What I know there's been an attempt to putting it over here. What kind of monitoring would be appropriately and would work? I also think that we would need to do action planning, but on a regular basis, regularly revise it. Otherwise, it could easily go off track. I think we could lose the vision very easily. So I felt the monitoring and the action planning would need to be specific, punchy, smart, measurable, achievable, realistic, and to a time frame. All that kind of robust. It needs tightening up a little bit. That does. Anyway, I think another problem area could be the legal framework. If we're kind of going into a legal agreements with Market Harbour and share costs to that effect, I think it would be difficult to walk away because we might be keyed into those legal agreements. So I think that is another area that could do with looking at quite closely. Can we just walk away if it's not working? I don't think so. I think that could be a problem, actually. But anyway, time will tell, but I think that needs to be monitored, and I'll certainly be looking at that. I think the fact that we've got housing revenue account and Harbour hasn't could be interesting for a shared deputy possibly over there. I'm just reading out my notes. I've been making them throughout the night. I think I've covered everything that I've been noting. I'm just looking through. Yeah, okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
I just want to ask one further question. If you look at where I started again at 157, 158, as you'll see, Harbour are saving 190,230 in year one, whereas Melton only save 42,780. My question here, really, just to play devil's advocate, how can you justify deleting a director post at Harbour when Melton are sharing an officer 50-50? You follow me? And surely this will weaken management in this area and may undermine confidence. I mean, what I can see a possible danger here in that we're losing 50% of somebody who's done a remarkable job as deputy chief exec, pulled the housing out of such mire, along with the portfolio holder. And if this falls back again and slips, because 50% is being spent with Harbour, I can really see a problem. Sorry, 50% to somebody else.
We get 50% to someone else.
No,
we're not losing out.
I'm not aware of it.
I know on housing because that's specific to Michelle's portfolio.
Yeah.
But in terms of personnel, kind of imagine this a bit like, you get those academy trusts in schools. You have a principal at the top, and then you have two deputies who then either manage two different sites or they both manage a site. That's kind of how I'm envisioning that this will work. We're not going to lose Michelle. She's still going to be here doing her job, looking after housing and communities. It's Harbour that are losing that.
Yeah, but
that's
the
the detriment to
they
them.
haven't got the expertise on the housing side.
But they don't have any housing stock, so it doesn't matter.
That's right. But we have, and if we're losing half of Michelle, it's going to leave a hole which could.
But then for me, we're gaining expertise elsewhere. I know we've got issues with housing, and I know exactly where you're coming from, but the point is there's a collective pool of expertise, and that other deputy chief exec supports us doing other things, and Michelle supports them doing community things. I don't see it as a negative. I see it as a positive.
Well, we'll agree to disagree there. Yep.
On page 165, I don't know whether it's me that's not understood this, but it says NBC is required to consider the proportion of the HRA contribution to the 50% allocation of shared CEO salary costs. Additionally, should HDC establish housing stock and a HRA in the future, it would be required to establish similar arrangements. So does that mean we are using some of our HRA money to fund the shared CEO salary? Because if we are, where does that leave us with our housing repairs that we've promised our residents is going to happen?
Yeah, Chief Exec will answer that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just conscious there's a few comments I'd just like to respond to from members, if that's okay. And if I miss anything, then please pick me up, and I may invite Dawn just to pick up that particular point on the HRA. So I think Councillor Wilkinson, thank you for the comments on the business case. I appreciate it's a lengthy document, and I appreciate your points about desire for clarity. And clearly we want to make sure that the council report reflects the key aspects of the proposition. So we'll certainly take that away and make sure those key aspects are highlighted. Councillor Douglas, in terms of the performance frameworks, I think that's something absolutely would have to be worked out as part of the partnership governance. So the shared strategy board, we would need a shared risk assessment or a strategic partnership risk assessment. We need a performance framework. So those things would have to be built. In terms of the legal agreements, you commented on just some anxiety around that. The memorandum of agreement is clearly designed to try and address those issues. That is due to be considered at audit and standards tomorrow. So there's an opportunity to review that in detail, but it does set out quite clearly the exit provisions, and those are based on existing arrangements that operate elsewhere. And again, that's advice and guidance we've taken from Nathan, as someone who's worked in these areas before and who has experience of supporting these partnerships established previously. In terms of the point around the resourcing of key roles like the shared deputy chief executive, so one of the key things that I've certainly been keen to make sure we don't do is that we don't commit to savings from day one that then ultimately leads us into a position where we can't manage any transition. So the transitional arrangements are going to be absolutely key here. One of the points that's been made in the business case is the need to look at what resource we have for transformation, what resource we have to manage any change. And that's something that would have to come forward in any subsequent business case. And certainly the saving that's identified in the Harbour Director of Communities, the business case makes quite clear would not look to be realised from day one. So it would absolutely have to be something that the shared deputy chief executive had the opportunity to look at what the need was going forward. So the initial structure that's proposed is just that. It's an initial structure, if the partnership to proceed, to give us a stable leadership platform to then look at all these things in more detail. And absolutely we would have to come back with further recommendations on what was required below that structure to make it effective. So this isn't the final position, it's simply an initial structure that is being proposed. And if I can perhaps just turn to Dawn just to pick up the comment on the HRA, please. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, the point that's trying to be made there is no different to any of our overhead staffing costs. We need to consider what proportion of that is relevant to charge to the housing revenue account. And I think the point that's being made there is obviously Harbour don't have that situation because they don't have a HRA, but should they then introduce a housing revenue account, then they would need to consider what share of chief exec and deputy chief execs would be relevant to charge to that account.
By the look of it, is from Councillor Evans.
Hi there. Yeah. Okay. Let's be clear. I always love committees and I always love scrutiny because Jacob has put his finger on the pulse, as has Jeannie. This is the problem with this business case. There's no flow path. We start here, do full council keep control of this each year? So in other words, if we start this process in December, in a year's time, when we get to phase one, will full council have control, or it will just be going through the cabinet all the time? Because I think members who are not in the cabinet are nervous because of that, because we're seeing something too much here, as you said, Jacob. I think we can all agree we can try on phase one. Yes, we can commit to that, but there's a phase two. There's no meat in them at all at the moment. As Jeannie said, there's no clear, yes, this is successful, this isn't successful, or anything like that. That is, without that, this is not a business case. The initial phase is, as Ed said to me, is a sort of wedge. It's a start. This is a trial. Let's see how it goes. But I think it's very important for all members, if they're going to vote at full council, what they're voting for. And what it looks like, if they look at this document at the moment, it looks as though they're voting for phase one, phase two, phase three. And they'll have no more further say. And I think that's, you know, whether in the opposition or Lib Dems or wherever they are, I think that's wrong. Every councillor, because it's a big decision and these are big corporate governance decisions, needs to have a chance to have their say if they feel after a year it's failing. You know, yes, cabinet obviously have the right in between those things, but I think I'm looking a bit at Joe here. I think it's important we still know what the governance and how it goes through, what if we agree to the strategic partnerships. Because you said, Ed, we can pull the plug at any stage. If it doesn't come to full council, it's going to be very hard to do that unless there's nothing in this document about that. And I think Jacob and Jeannie have made some important points, and that's why this isn't a business case, because to us, you know, is it just financially successful? We've made those savings, fair enough, tick it off, or is it more than that? And I think it's more than that, and that's what's missing here. Yes, we save money, but I think we're more than that as a council. We just don't want to pound shillings and pence. God, that makes me feel old. To be the bottom line, we want to see improvements in what we're doing for our residents here. And I don't see necessarily that, well, certainly, as you said, there's nothing there that says, this is what we're going to do for Melton. This is our aim. This is a year. This strategic partnership will tick that box if it does this. And in a year's time, we'll come back to you and say, yeah, it's successful, and make the case. There's nothing of that. And that's what worries me. And I think it's important, whether it's scrutiny or something else, something's there which involves members to actually keep watching this, because it's a big decision. And we need to be able to come back 6 months, a year from now and say, yeah, okay, carry on. And I don't see that in this document. It just says we're starting phase one, phase two. And that's what I saw when I first looked at it, Ed. I thought, oh, we're signing up to 3 years of this. And I think a lot of members I've spoken to are nervous about that. Sorry, Ed. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Evans. If I can just respond to that. So I think a really important point of this whole process, and it's something that's reflected very clearly in the memorandum of agreement, and clearly will make sure is reflected more strongly in any council reports, is any sovereign decision-making powers this council has now will be retained in full. So there is no dilution of those whatsoever. In terms of the partnership structures, they are informal, non-decision-making structures, merely advisory back to the respective decision-making bodies that exist today. So whatever decisions are taken at the relative committees or cabinet or council today would be retained going forward, and that wouldn't change. There is a commitment, and it's referenced in here, but it will certainly be referenced in the council report around a 12-month review coming back to council, and then an annual review thereafter. So I think that's an important part of the process, because again, this is about, if this works, it's something that the people need to be comfortable with and happy with and support. And that's something I think as officers, we would want the support from members of both councils to see it proceed. So that's a key part of it. And again, we will capture that point and make sure it's clearly reflected. I think the other aspect that would need to flow from any decision that council did make, if both councils were minded to proceed with this, clearly would need to develop a partnership delivery plan, which pick up some of some of the propositions in here and turn them into a delivery plan and turn them into some actions that we could take forward and then manage and monitor alongside the performance framework we talked about, alongside risk registers that are being developed as well. So that's all work that will follow. Clearly, the first question for council is, do you want to enter this partnership and establish the leadership at the top of it initially from an offers perspective, to then work with both councils and taking that forward? And that's the question that will come forward, and we'll make sure that's really clearly articulated in the council report.
If you could then follow up with providing that information to all members, hard copy on the savings for phase 1 and 2, the breakdown of it. I think you've made a note, but if that can go out to members, where are we, Tuesday, end of the week, should be well within your capacity, no doubt. Good. So I believe that is all the questions. Oh, sorry.
Just one thing, just can members have some assurance around the deputy CEO's kind of portfolios? Because I know there are concerns about, how our housing has been over the last few years and the really good place it is now. I think members do have some concerns around our deputy CEO and kind of how that would actually work in a realistic way across both authorities. I think just some assurance around that would be welcome.
I think what I may do is in a moment just invite Nathan just to pick up the details of what shares arrangements work like. As I said, I would reiterate that any move to a shared arrangement is absolutely not about asking someone to move from doing one job to two jobs into one, and there needs to be transitional support. So the structure that's before you is an interim initial structure that will allow Michelle and Liz to look at their teams and see what they need to bring forward to make the partnership be effective. So again, we haven't gone too far too fast to say let's come up with all the answers to the questions now, because that would be premature, and ultimately the decision first is, do you want to enter the partnership? But there are many places that are making this work. The other thing I would say as well, one of the key things and differences we've made on the HRA is we've put structures that are robust and resilient. So there are multiple colleagues within those teams who are capable, competent, and who are delivering for this council. So as with any team, it is based on a collective effort, and ultimately it's about making sure, and my job as the head of paid service and ultimately of my senior team is making sure that we across the board have people who can deliver and the structures are there to support. So we are confident that we can do that, but clearly that work will still need to be done, and we don't have all the answers to what the future structure would look like. Nathan, just perhaps if it's okay through you, Chair, just to invite Nathan to reflect on what approaches are operating elsewhere and how they've made that work.
So thank you, Ed, and thank you, Chair. So in relation to the two Deputy Chief Executive roles that are proposed for this partnership, for Harborough would benefit from Michelle's skills around housing and communities. And I think, as was reflected earlier, in return, Melton would benefit from the corporate and transformation skills of Liz Elliott, who is the current interim chief executive in Harborough, but would return to a substantive post of deputy chief executive. And therefore, as Ed's just reflected, those two deputy chief executives, you have 100% of a complete deputy chief executive, but sharing a proportion of each of those. And as Ed's just alluded to, based on the priorities that you'd have in each organisation, you have now a different mix of skills that could lend that skills and capacity into both organisations. So in the case of Harborough, more lent towards the opportunity of working with Michelle in housing and communities. They currently have an interim arrangement at the moment for that director post, and of course that interim arrangement would be a risk to the council. And for Melton, benefiting from the opportunities in the corporate and transformation space to bring about some of the opportunities that we've been discussing this evening in terms of the future benefits of the partnership. So it would be down for your head of paid service, which if the proposal went through would be Ed, to make sure that the blend of those skills and the blend of time that would be required to have those skills at your disposal within each council was met against your priorities. So although the cost is being shared 50-50, you're effectively paying 100% for a deputy chief executive within both councils, but you've got that blend of opportunity, and Ed would prioritise where those skills are needed and what those priorities are within both organisations. What has worked well in other organisations that, and of course, you wouldn't be the first in sharing a senior management team. There are many, many good examples of senior management teams that have been shared. The importance of starting with a chief executive and 2 deputy chief executives lends the opportunity to lend that skill and expertise into organisations that you're going into partnership with to help make improvements in those organisations. And of course, as members have rightly referred to, you have a housing revenue account in Melton, but you don't have one in Harbour. But of course, you have housing general fund services in both councils, which will benefit from the expertise that Michelle brings. So I think you are due to speak to the South and East Lincolnshire Council partnership with Councillor Leyland and Rob Barlow as the chief executive across 3 district councils. And for South Holland, they have an HRA, and for East Lindsey and Boston, they don't have an HRA. So it would be useful when you meet with them to ask them how they manage that expertise across the HRA and the benefits of having someone with the skills that leads the HRA benefiting the Housing General Fund services that exist in this case within Boston and East Lindsey. But that shows that the proposal for this evening is a proposal across 2 councils. But in terms of that single leadership team led by a shared chief executive and deputies, so in the case of South and East Lincolnshire, they have 1 shared chief executive across the 3 councils, but they have 4 deputy chief executives across the 3 councils to help make that work. So similar proposals are being proposed here to blend that skill and expertise, but make the point clear, as I think was picked up earlier, that you still have that capacity of a full deputy chief executive at your disposal. It's just a mixed skill set and 2 individuals that will provide that skill set rather than just 1. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. That concludes the evening. These notes will be presented to the Cabinet when it meets on the 6th. Did you say, Joe? 6th of December?
Yeah, it is the 6th. That's
Yeah.
right, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah. So as there's no further urgent business, I'll close the meeting at 8:35. Thank you. Thursday on Zoom.